Hi, I'm George Wilbanks. Thanks for joining us for our leadership video series where we interview leaders in the asset and wealth management business. This is the first in our leadership video series. We'll be interviewing Mark Casady, the Chief Executive Officer of LPL Financial. Mark will be talking to us about organizational transformation and some major changes that he has overseen over the last 3 years at his firm. Okay, so Mark, to set the stage, almost all of your direct reports today have changed over the last 3 years. You know, that's a big transformation. That's a lot of action. What happened?
It is a lot of action. It's part of a process that's a healthy process of saying what is it we're trying to be in the next round for the company. And you're kind enough to say that we've done a lot of things that have been transformative, and that really comes from a root belief that we're on a mission. And this great mission that we're part of is to bring unbiased and objective advice to millions of Americans, particularly middle-income consumers, as you mentioned. So that's a great mission. It deserves our very best. And sometimes our very best is about having a team that has the next leg of experience that we need. It's the third time I've had a situation here at the company where we've wanted to transform the leadership team. Sometimes it comes from a leadership team doing quite well and deciding it's time to do the next thing. We have some vineyard owners. We have some folks who do nonprofit work. So it's very nice that they have those choices to do. And it's time to have somebody else come in, either move up in the organization or be hired to really take on those roles. But this transformation was led under a belief that we had done an awful lot for the company in terms of getting it to be sizable, that we had now taken it public. And it was ready to think about a company that might be quite a bit larger and the complexity that lives in that kind of company. What's the skill set of the leadership team need to be to manage that complexity? And that's really the base of where we started.
Got it. Well, you know, your employment engagement numbers are kind of at all-time highs. You shared with me some interesting data in advance of this conversations. And to me, it reflects almost an envious benchmark for the entire industry. When I think about what I see in not just the happiness index, but the BCG Net Promoter Index kind of Net Promoter Score sort of measurement of how engaged are employees. Mm-hmm. And you know, oftentimes when an organization goes through this much change, I see the exact opposite. Mm-hmm. It's almost universal, frankly, to be honest with you. So, you know, what was the secret of embracing this much change at the top of the house? And yet, in your direct reports, and yet still having the ability to instill confidence in the rest of the firm throughout that?
Well, I think it's a little bit of the order you take it in, right? So the place you have to start first is really having a goal around your relationship with employees. So where we started about 3.5 years ago was to become an employer of choice. We felt we had a good company. People enjoy working here, are excited to be part of that mission for bringing objective advice. But what we found was we weren't doing the programmatic solutions that really would help employees feel like we're investing heavily in their success. So we said, let's start with employer of choice, because if you start there, that takes a little while to get some legs. And then you can build up trust and transparency that allows you to then make the changes that come next. So that was the first place we started. We really thought about it programmatically. What are benefits? What's our compensation structure? What are the ways that we train and educate employees? How do we do succession planning? How much hiring do we do from within? You're nice to say that our scores have gone up. They have gone up tremendously over the last 3 years. They're at levels that are great, but they need to be even better. Right? We're an ambitious company. But I think what's really important is I think we have gained trust and transparency to be able to do the kind of changes that came next.
On another front of sort of the partnership of running the firm, you have a remarkable board. These are very demanding and knowledgeable senior executives. Jack Brennan, Jim Reapy, Ann Mulcahy, 2 TPG partners. I mean, if I think about the world of your peer group of other large, mid-sized public companies, having a couple of private equity guys on your board is almost to be feared in many ways. It seems as if you've been willing to embrace this very aggressive corporate governance oversight. And a lot of your peers, and in a fashion, in a way that makes me say this is an organization that's setting sort of benchmarks for any public company, to be honest with you.
Well, we've done well in the ISS surveys that really score boards and score, if you will, transparency or openness for shareholders. So we've gotten very good ratings, and that's been, again, a programmatic. You're going to see a theme through all this, which is that we set out to do that and make sure that we had the right governance in place. The other thing we set out was when we first hired our very own independent board member, was we worked hard to make sure and think about what is the governance structure that we want. And you're pointing out that what we chose were people who are demanding, right? People who set high standards, who work on very large boards, really multi-billion dollars, companies, and are leaders on those boards. And we set a very high standard for the kind of board member we wanted. And what I wanted was a board that challenged the management team and basically raised the bar continually on our performance. And they've done that, right? They've held us to a standard that we should be held to for such a great business. And I think it's also another example of saying we need to have some outsized talent and let talent drive us to our success, as opposed to having success and then bringing in outsized talent for it. So it's a very planful process of governance and talent management of a different type, at the board level.
Many, as a follow-on question to that, many CEOs see demanding boards like that as a challenge that they sort of wrestle to the ground. And in fact, it seems you've embraced it in a way which has led to greater productivity. Can you talk a little bit about those, some events and things that happen along those lines as advice for your peers?
Yeah, I think you do make a very conscious choice of kind of a board that believes in what you believe in, has a similar view, doesn't have particularly much diversity in a variety of ways of measuring that. And those are certainly easier boards to deal with. I've dealt with those boards historically, not here, but other places. And that does make life a little easier day to day. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't give you a competitive edge. And we're at a time of great change across every industry. And part of my belief is a board that challenges you will actually be a competitive asset. And I think that is what we've proven with this board. So examples for you of how they've shown up, if you will, in the boardroom is by being very clear about what success is or isn't as it relates to operating plans, right? Being very clear about how we should engage in a strategic discussion about the future of the firm. Being very clear about having an opinion about the choices that we're making. And not being afraid to express those. I think the other strength is that it is a diverse board in terms of background and in terms of experience set. They're not all from the financial services industry, and therefore we get a beauty of that diversity in lots of different points of view as we talk about a particular issue. So we could talk about issue A and find that there's sort of some folks who sit over here on that issue, and some folks who sit a little bit on the opposite of that. And then the debate that ensues is incredibly valuable because out of that debate, you get some really smart idea that comes up. It particularly happened this last summer in our strategic offsite when we were debating what is the next plan for this company and how will it play out. And that's where you really see the value of both that diversity and the experience that's in the boardroom.
That's fantastic. So back to where we started talking about the fact that there are a lot of new people around the table of your management team. As you've thought about your recruiting initiatives and as you look back, my observations as a partner but as also an outside observer is that you have been able to set the bar extraordinarily high for sort of where you wanted to go in terms of the type of people you would recruit. Recruiting people from some of your most well-regarded competitors that are significantly larger than you are or were and sat in jobs that were perhaps seen by the outside world as significantly larger than the job they came to sat in here. Or a professional, as in the case of your general counsel, who nobody in the world would have thought was willing and able to leave a career at the SEC to come and join you. What's the secret sauce to that? I mean, how did you make that kind of magic happen in the marketplace? Because I do think that's a little bit the perception of the marketplace today.
Well, I think there's two things. One is the mission's very powerful, right? We don't work just to make a paycheck. I mean, everyone can do that. But the reality is that for people like that who perform at such high levels, they're here first for the mission. And this mission's very powerful. There's no one else in retail financial advice who can say that they offer an objective and conflict-free environment to provide that advice. That's powerful. So they love the idea of it. And that's the hook, right? Once you get the hook in, and then you start reeling. And the reeling is, how many times in your life are you going to have a chance to really sit in a boardroom with great directors and think about the issues that we think about here, where are you going to often get a chance in your career to be a disruptive business model, right? To do things for consumers that are really wonderful and helpful and are going to result in them being more successful. What I love here is what we're doing is great work, right? And we're aligned with them in that mission. And that really is the very first place. And then the chance to really continue that disruption, continue the uniqueness of the model, it becomes a very powerful draw for those individuals. And I think finally it's about the environment. This is a really great place to work. And I, over and over again, just recently in San Diego, had an executive who joined us, who you know well, from Goldman Sachs. And he said to me, Mark, I've been here a month, and people are so nice. They are so helpful. They want me to succeed, and they are trying to make sure that I get what I need to succeed. And we're aligned in that mission. We're aligned in helping advisors. I just have never experienced that anywhere else. Those are good companies, right? They're aligned in the mission too. But he said, I've never experienced that kind of warmth and connection and willingness to think about group success. And I think that is the magic of what we have and why it's appealing to individuals as they get to know us.
So, Mark, you've actively promoted a series of values. You have a code to live by at the firm.
It's Commitment Creed.
Commitment Creed, the Commitment Creed. Thank you. And it's to me that it seems that I've heard about it, not just because somebody in HR gave me the sheet and said this is our Commitment Creed, but because people talk about it. And by the time candidates come back a second or third time of interviews, they're telling me about it. Can you talk a little bit about that Commitment Creed? Because I think it's really a valuable tool that I don't see quite as well defined at a lot of the firms that have mission statements and very valuable and well thought out proposals. And then how do you turn it into such a living thing within the firm, not just a document that people read and that you give to people who join the firm, but appears to live within the culture of the firm?
Yeah, it's a very powerful document. So it was written by our founder back when Linsco and Private Ledger merged. So that's formed what we all know as LPL. And he wrote it as a way to express the relationship between an employee and our client, the advisor. We've updated a little bit to deal with the larger firm that we are today, but really haven't altered it much. And I think that's the first power, right? As a gentleman who was 29 years old at the time, with a smart idea about objective financial advice, writing down how to describe that. And in doing so, I think captured a little bit of lightning in the bottle. And I think that's actually what's so powerful about it today is it's just as true now as it was so many years ago, that it defines this relationship well. It makes the client the center of what it is that we do. And that's unusual. Now, we've done exactly as you said, which is we make sure that new employees learn about it. We make sure every employee has a copy of it. And I am told over and over again by employees when I meet with them that they do literally look at it at times when they're unsure about a decision they need to make, and they use that as a guidepost. And that's what makes it a living document. And what we're trying to do is just constantly promote its use in that way. And then we know smart people will take it from there, and that's what they've done.
That's great. Congratulations on that. I think that's probably, if you go back to the core of any, I was at an institutional investor conference the other day, and we talked about, the last question was, what really makes a difference? And I said, culture is king. Yeah. And that's really the way I do see firms. It's the glue that holds people together. When a disruptor like me approaches them, it leads to continuity, and I think it reinforces the mission. It's great.
Well, it creates an institutional value, right? So we have had a lot of change, and you wouldn't choose to do this much change, right? But it turned out to be the right thing for us to do as we entered into the change process, the transformation that we've talked about. And I think that's the glue, this cultural glue, really captured through the Commitment Creed, that's the one that's really allowed us to have people understand what we stand for and be able to say, even all the noise of change, I get what it is we're supposed to do, right? And I'm going to make sure and deliver on that, and that's a mission worth fighting for, and that's, I think, what makes it powerful, but also makes the culture so strong. And that's the part that if I were going to pick one thing I'm proudest about over the nearly 15 years I've been here, it's that we've been able to keep that cultural flame through thick and thin, through a lot of growth, through some tough times. Don't want to relive 2009, for example, and that has really, I think, made the difference in who we are and why we've been successful as an organization.
I'd like to continue on that theme a little bit. You've talked about mission, about the culture of the firm, about the value proposition. If I look back recently, not too long, right? Just a few months here, there are quite a number of industry leaders, your competitors, regulators, pundits. They're all talking about the deficit of values in the financial services world broadly. what happened to trust? And it's always seemed such an obvious thing to me that in a professional service business, all you have is your word is your bond, and the trust of gaining the trust of your employees and your clients. And yet it's just painfully obvious across a couple of major market debacles that there's a huge deficit of that in the business we're in. Now, you and actually several of the members of your team have a background with family in the clergy or the ministry. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about where does that ethical center of gravity come from? It's not off of a page in a mission statement. Where does that ethical center of gravity come from for you? And how do you put that to work every day in the decisions you make? And how do you convince others in the organization to live to that same unusually high standard that makes life worthwhile for you?
Well, there's two different areas. I think one area for us, George, is as a company thinking about how we're doing the right thing whenever we have a chance. We're a big, complex business, right? We've made mistakes. And as I look at those mistakes, what's important to me is, are we committed to fixing those? And as long as we're committed to fixing them, and as long as we're committed to trying to not repeat them, then that's a good outcome. Because this size business is going to have issues that pull at either ethical strings or pull at behavioral strings or pull at issues that relate to the way you process business. It's just a complex business. So I think that's the first step, right, is the culture one, which automatically says we need to go fix this, and there's not even a question about that. That starts with the board, right, and them reinforcing that. It then certainly moves through management and then lives with all of our employees as a high standard. And that really lives within the commitment creed. It also lives within this culture that's been strong for so long. So that's the first piece of how I think about this. Second piece is individual, right? We have several PKs, preachers' kids, who are members of the management team. I am one, and I think for me, it really taught me about the value of transparency, openness, and honesty. I sometimes say I'm not complex enough to figure out how to compartmentalize these things, but what it really comes from is just a desire for us to be very straightforward about the issues that we face. And I think I see that among the management team, whether they have a PK background or not, is they're very open and transparent people, and we've tried to really reinforce that in the culture. When you do that, something happens. People tell you problems, right? People talk to you about issues that worry them. And once you know that, you can then work on them. And that's, I think, the key, is have a place in which it feels comfortable to talk about uncomfortable issues and really think about that in a wide range of spectrum. And that ultimately lets you then deal with the right ethical outcome. Our industry has had a lot of issues, in and of itself, and I think some of those are structural, right? They're the way the business works. Others are bad choices companies or individuals make. We're trying to avoid the company and individual bad choices by making sure that that ethical standard is strong within the business.
So looking back, across a period of what I would, from the outside in many ways, look at a fairly tumultuous period of change in the senior management of the firm, and thinking about your peers at other mid to large size financial service firms sitting in the CEO role. Any lessons that you've learned, any things that you've come upon that were particularly useful to you as sort of moments of a light switch went on and you said, oh, if I'd only known that. Any things like that you look back that say that stick in your mind as lessons learned across that, covering all the topics we've talked about just now?
Well, I think a few things that are going to sound a little bit like common sense, right? They were going to be remarkably that way. So the first one is take action sooner. That when you discover an issue or a structure that isn't working or a choice you need to make, it's just better to make the decision and move on. And I think somewhere early in the process, I hit that one. I think that may have come from my board, who are all individuals who have done some great work in running companies through transformations. Second part of it is more from peers, those who are in similar jobs elsewhere. It's really the directness with which they communicate. And again, that transparency reinforced a natural transparency that I have, but maybe realize that everyone has issues, right? And being open about it helps solve them. So let's make sure and be open about those ideas and issues and then go and solve them. So I think it gave me strength to think about openness in a little different way than I might naturally have done. Another lesson that I've picked up is that I've watched others in the industry is how to manage larger and larger organizations. I'm not a natural delegator, right? I like detail. I can talk about detail ad nauseum, unfortunately, for someone who interviews me and others. And I sort of want to go there whenever I look at an issue. What I've learned is there's incredible value in asking others to take on that responsibility, and incredible value for them in terms of learning. And that's taken me a little while longer to learn. Particularly as we've gone through some significant transformation where I did need to actually get in the details, it played to my strengths. And I've had to teach myself to come back out of those details and make sure the team that now oversees it knows they're responsible. The funniest story I'll share is one when Michelle Arshakoff, who helped us bring to the firm, was working with me about a month into her tenure. She came to run GRC, which is our risk management and compliance group, and I was talking to her about some detailed issue in her team, and she looked at me and she said, "Mark, you do understand I run the group now, right? Why don't you let me take care of it, and I'll let you know how it goes." I thought, okay, there's a moment. I need to delegate. And I felt great about the delegation. It wasn't a mistrust. It was just that I just needed to get out of the habit of not delegating. So I've learned that lesson. I've learned maybe repeatedly as I go along.
So there's two good ones. Any others?
I think the other one is related to the nature of how one thinks about their place in the world, right? And it sounds a little strange to say it that way. But what I mean by that is understand that LPL actually is a large company, which is a fact I haven't wanted to acknowledge for quite some time because I like that entrepreneurial, scrappy sort of organization. And I've somewhat feared, thinking about this company as a big place or a bigger place. And that sort of felt a little bureaucratic to me and a little uncomfortable. But what I have learned is that when you put guardrails on the highway, you protect lives, right? And you make things easier. And in fact, you actually can go a little faster as an organization. So we can keep our entrepreneurial roots of speed of execution and ability to get things done. And by adding controls and by adding structure to the organization, we actually can make that do quite well as a bigger company. And I've learned that by watching, observing, and asking lots of questions of my peers and other executives who are here about their experience in that area. And that has been incredibly valuable. So I'd encourage anybody listening to go faster on their decisions, accept structure in a healthy way, and then implement from there.
Well, great. Thanks, Mark, for joining us in our leadership series, and good luck to you and LPL, and I really appreciate your time.